In today's podcast for Data for All, data in bourbon. Welcome to the Data for All podcast. I'm Charlie Apigian.
And I'm Charlie Yielding, where we want to empower you to think different with data.
And welcome to the second episode where we dive deep into data in a specific industry. Our first episode was Data in Music with Trevor Hinesley from Soundstripe.
This time we dive into the wonderful world of the bourbon industry.
Yes, and before we get to the interview with our amazing guest, Kenny Coleman from Bourbon Pursuits, we are just letting you all know that this was our first time doing a remote podcast.
Right. When we got started, it was one of our main goals to deliver high quality podcasting.
Yep.
And a part of that was not doing remote work. And, as time went on, we discovered
We gave it a shot, right?
Well,
Yep.
we discovered tools that are supposed to allow us to be able to deliver high quality remote interviews. And in a vacuum that works. But sadly, when you have a very poor mic, it's not the case.
Well, it wasn't terrible, but we just felt that we need to preface this episode. Again, Kenny was incredibly gracious, but he's in Lexington. We just didn't ask him to come down, but he's a data guy and he's a bourbon guy, and the two go together very well in our industry. We have a lot of people that are bourbon enthusiasts, and we just thought it was the perfect matchmaking for our next data in. And so we did use a remote podcasting thing, and hey, I was in a house completely by myself. Charlie's at his house where they're literally doing construction.
Yep.
He's got 2 kids and a wife, and he was so gracious in his time on that Tuesday night. So I'm not going to let you feel bad about yourself.
I feel bad enough on my own, so don't worry about it.
Well, so because we have this amazing audio engineer, Jeremy, that helps us with every one of our episodes, he's going to make it sound better than what we heard.
This time, yeah. I feel bad, though, because this time we're like, hey, we didn't record an episode in your studio because that's an optimal environment, but we'd still like you to make up for our mistakes.
Yes.
So sorry, Jeremy.
And Jeremy's awesome.
Yes.
And we're sitting in his studio again here today, making that apology. So is that good enough for you, Charlie? Do you feel good about this?
Prepare for the degradation of my audio quality.
Oh, and yes, and we were sipping bourbon during this.
Oh, yeah.
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit of a precursor. So with all of that, folks, here's our amazing interview with a very generous and gracious guest, Kenny Coleman. We are very excited to be able to dive into not only bourbon, but the bourbon process and what it really takes to get started in that. And the best part is we have somebody that is a little bit of akin to us, somebody that's been in the tech industry for a long time, Kenny Coleman, co-owner of Pursuit Spirits and the co-host of Bourbon Pursuit, which is the #1 bourbon podcast out there. Welcome, Kenny. And why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your journey in data and tech, and then we'll get into that bourbon as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I know you said that the #1 bourbon podcast, which is true, but then we also have like the number 62nd podcast, which you're also right on, Behind the Pursuit, because
behind the Pursuit.
Because
right.
I hate free time, and so we ended up starting 2 podcasts.
So did you start both of them at the same time? I just have to ask that, or?
Oh no. Bourbon Pursuit started way before. That was started back in 2015, and then we started Behind the Pursuit as a way to help grow our marketing footprint, because we're podcasters, we don't have $100,000 to throw at influencer marketing, if you will, but we know how to run a podcast. And so we figured it was a cool way to kind of give people an inside and behind the scenes look of what it is to like to start and grow a bourbon brand. But
that is great. But before you got even into that, I'm assuming you had started in the tech industry. So tell us a little bit about your journey, going back to, when you started maybe in the tech field, and then, of course, getting into your 2 full-time jobs now.
Yeah. So I don't know how far people usually go back, but of course, I think with a lot of people and a lot of us that are in tech, it all starts in maybe grade school. is when we first get our first computer, start taking it apart, learning all the peripherals, how to build it. You end up building your first gaming rig when you're in high school and so on and so forth. And that was kind of really what set me on the path. I think everybody also remembers their first 386 that they got, the games that they would play, Oregon Trail, all those things, they just kind of come rushing back. And we all kind of have that same just kind of background. That's how we all cut our teeth. But for me, of course, everything through middle school was great. I ended up actually going to one of the very first high schools in the nation that offered CCNA training, Cisco Network Academy training, as a high school curriculum. Now, it sounds cool in theory, but the teacher was learning about one course ahead of us, and it's a 2-year class. And you could imagine anybody out there has done CCNA training. That is way too long to sit there and study to be able to take an exam. But you take it your junior and senior year. After the end of their senior year, you can go out, get your CCNA certification, go on your way. But with 2 years, that lag time, the summer break, with a teacher just knowing a little bit more than you do, and by the way, it starts off with like 30, 40 people. By the time it's over, I think there's 8 or 10 of us left. And I remember you're looking at the days when you're talking like 40 pin connectors that were going between switches and everything like that too. So it's old school stuff now, but we all went out, we all took the CCNA exam, and we all failed. Right. Oh, yeah. I mean, that's just exactly what happened. So I went to college and really thought I was going to go for a computer science degree until I realized it's in the engineering school, and that's going to require 4 years of math. And I know this is a data science program, but I am terrible at math. And so that really didn't jive well with me. But our business school had something, if a lot of universities have it, they're called management information systems. And it's more along the lines of general IT work and stuff like that. But we didn't have MIS. At University of Kentucky, we had a program called decision science and information systems. And a lot of that was just writing a lot of Visual Basic code in Excel. And I graduated with that. We did, a few years of that. I felt really good. Straight A's, if you would call that, through my entire major. But when my first job out of college was actually working for a Sprint call center, and it was actually in the back chugging along and looking at data. So I graduated. I came into this role where there were 2 guys that used to come to work around 4 or 5 a.m. every single day, and they would have to pull all these records from different basically web backends that figured out how many calls went out, how many calls were dropped, how many calls were resolved. I mean, you could just think of all the things that you would need to pull to find all this data. And they had to give a report every single morning at 8 a.m. for when the general manager showed up. Now, today it's a little bit different. Like, you're talking 24 hours, maybe 10 hours to go and try to find data to try to find a root cause analysis. That doesn't fly today. Today, it's like you have stuff that's telemetry that gives you stuff right off the bat. So you kind of have an idea of how to problem solve stuff. But I was able to come in there, and I took what they were building that took them 3 to 4 hours per person to be able to do, wrote a bunch of Visual Basic stuff that essentially took their 4 hours of work down to about 20 minutes. And I did that, but I realized right away I didn't want to go work in a call center anymore. It's just not the environment I wanted to be in. So I looked and tried to figure out what was out there, found a position for doing just general data center administration stuff or office administration, not office administration, but you're talking, fixing emails, fix server patches, whatever you could do. It was actually at a marketing company in downtown Louisville. The main branch was in Indianapolis, Indiana. And so I was the lone IT guy at this branch. So I would come to work, and I was a typical IT person, t-shirt, jeans, sandals. I'd sit in the back all day, listen to music, and I have movies going. And I would just sit there, I'm sitting there either scrolling through Dig at the time. I think that was the big one, like way before. Reddit was there, but Dig was like the really big one. So I'm sitting there scrolling through there, looking for deals on Slick Deals, just trying to, just kind of killing 8 hours in a day by just doing general tasks, whatever kind of help tickets would come up. And I did that for about 2 years, but I'm pretty sure, like most of us, there's a breaking point on how many times you can take somebody because they just can't figure out how to fix their email.
Absolutely.
So I said, well, I've already had this background in networking. Let me go ahead, crack down on this and see if I can, kind of go to the next phase of my life. And I did. I studied for about 4 months, maybe what it was, and went in, got my CCNA, and within about 2 weeks, got a new job and immediately doubled my salary. And I was like, okay, there's something here. And I went on this whole path. I go, all right, networking's where I'm going to be at. I'm going to go CCNP, CCIE, and just go all the way in with Cisco networking stuff. So I joined this law firm in downtown Kentucky, went there. I was their main networking person. And as soon as I got in there, they go, hey, do you know anything about SANs or, storage area networks or VMware or anything like that? I go, I've never even heard of it. They go, well, you're our new VMware guy. So
nice.
They sent me to a boot camp, and that's kind of
what year was this?
This was let me think, probably 2012. No, had to be before then, maybe 2009, 2010, maybe somewhere around there.
So DAS was still developing as a thing, like desktop as a service.
Oh yeah. Desktop as a service wasn't even a thing back then.
Yeah.
I'm talking like I got in ESXi 3, or even it wasn't even ESXi back then. It was ESX 3.0, I think, is when I first started. Right. So we're on vSphere 8 now. Is kind of what it is. So I went in there. But that's kind of when things clicked. Everything changed for me. Instead of trying to figure out how packets flow through the network, I really just doubled down on everything VMware and virtualization. And I really loved the technology. So I would sit there and just start figuring out. I mean, I virtualized 90% of that place before I left, went to the next place, came in as somebody that it was all physical, virtualized all that. And it was just a technology that I loved. I started blogging about it, writing about it. And that's because at the time when the technology was so fresh, they didn't have great docs. And if you figured out something that wasn't available to docs, you would write a blog about it. And that eventually got me noticed. And I ended up speaking at my first VMworld in 2000. Yeah, it was 2010. So yeah, about 2009 is probably when I got into it. So 2010 is when I did my first speaking session at VMworld. And it was
back then VMworld was a good show too.
Oh dude. I mean, it was a killer show. And it was just something that I truly passionately really enjoyed doing. And then I ended up going to the next phase of completely skipping that middle step when people usually go and work for a value-added reseller or an implementer or something like that, and went straight to the vendor side. So I went from customer to vendor, worked for it was a little company called Acadia at the time, and then it quickly got rebranded to VCE, which was the joint venture between VMware, Cisco, and EMC. And I came in as somebody that really knew the VMware product suite really well. So me and about 4 other people, we were in charge of selling what were called V-blocks at the time. We were in charge of doing the pre-sales architects is what we were for service providers around the globe. And it was a true, really well-funded startup where it wasn't uncommon that we'd be on the phone at 3 a.m. with Singapore because we're a whole US-based team, and we had one guy that knew networking, one guy that knew UCSs, one guy that really knew storage. I knew VMware, and we would all come in and we start architecting all this stuff for these different customers.
Wow.
And it was something that we all loved, and it was a very early time for service providers. It didn't really catch on too well. So our team kind of got dismantled, and we all went to different areas. I ended up becoming this overlay V architect position and becoming more of a VMware expert for the broader sales force for enterprise and commercial and government sales and all this other kind of stuff. And as this time kept going, I kept getting the VMware certifications, but I honestly got burnt out of VMware. I just didn't want to learn anymore. And it was like, gosh, like VCDX is the highest that you go. And I looked at it and I go, what am I actually going to get out of this if I get the highest certification? I thought I was going to go CCIE if I'm going to go work for a service provider, which I'm glad I didn't go that way. Not to say that working for a service provider is a bad thing. I just glad I didn't go that route. But going to the VCDX route, like it's a very specialized, very small skill set, not small skill set, but it's very narrow in what you can do with it. So I just said, well, let me go ahead and figure out what I can get myself into. And there was a guy on my team. He ended up writing this web interface, this front end for on Ruby on Rails for vCloud Director, interfacing with its API. And I go, okay, if he can figure out to do this, I'm going to figure out how to do this. So I kind of went back and tried to figure out how to program really all over again from scratch. I mean, of course, you did a lot of Visual Basic, and you get get the general gist of loops and ifs and variables and all that sort of stuff. But really had to go back and learn from scratch. So I started really just getting in with Ruby, trying to figure out how to do Rails applications, put a few different things out there, doing a little bit of stuff with Python. And I put some stuff out there, and it started getting noticed as well. There was this one program that I created. It was called Jump Squares. It's completely gone now, but it was something that never existed inside the data center before. It was essentially a good bookmarking tool, a good visualization bookmarking tool that anybody can access. Because if Charlie's, if you come work for me, and I got to say, okay, here's the 42 different portals or interfaces to all of our backends, to all the switches and servers and blah, 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 blah. Well, instead of me just having to hand you over a bunch of bookmarks, like, wouldn't it be great if there was some sort of visual tool that you can just go through a web interface and you see exactly what it is? You click on it and it's got all the usernames and passwords, whatever is embedded. And I'm not going to say I was a good security person, but it was all there.
So every enterprise still in 2023 needs something like that. So where did it go?
It was running on Heroku for a while, and to the point where it started getting hacked. And the database, like just the amount of entries was getting, because it was open to the public. I actually made it as a SaaS-based service. You didn't actually have it running internally. It was a SaaS-based service.
That's cool.
And it started just getting too many rows. And they were like, well, you have to start paying soon. And I'm like, I don't really think anybody's really using this anymore. So I'm just going to go ahead and kill it. And that's pretty much what happened. I'm pretty sure it's still on my GitHub somewhere, but it hasn't been updated in probably 5-10 years. So
I'm telling you, if you need an alternate route, every enterprise I know of needs a piece of software like that.
Yeah, for sure. But you're right. I used to teach VBA with Excel, Microsoft Access. We're talking 20 years ago. It's funny. My son just actually pinged me today and said, "Do you know anything about Visual Basic? Because my boss uses it all the time in Excel, and I should learn it." And I'm like, "Are you kidding me? I'd love to go back old school and try to remember all that stuff." But I think what's interesting is a couple of things you said there is you don't like math, but I got a feeling you embrace data these days. And I think that's what I love hearing that, because too often people think, oh, data, I'm not good at math. I can't do data. No, you can embrace it. You can be empowered. You can use it to your advantage. That doesn't mean you need 4 math classes in college, to do that.
Well, college would differ. Or beg to differ.
They got to get some credit hours somewhere, don't they?
that is true. And so I got to ask, so during that time, you said, going back to like 2015, then was when Bourbon Pursuit started. So you've had this love for bourbon at the same time while you're gaining skills in one area. How did you gain skills to get started, first of all, with the podcasting and with the idea and inspiration for a company?
Yeah. And just to tail on the rest of that tech journey, now I actually do work for VMware, and I work in their cloud data computing, doing all stuff in Kubernetes. So that's learning Golang and some other stuff. But now I'm so not to say I know Rust, but I'm literally rusty with Golang. So don't come looking at my code, and I'm not a person that writes tests. So. But yeah,
because I was about to jump into VMware because they bought AirWatch, which I work in mobility and I actually work at a help desk, and I've worked with AirWatch for a long time. And then when VMware bought AirWatch, things changed quite significantly, and it was impactful.
I want to talk data and bourbon, so I'm not letting you down that rabbit hole.
So it makes you feel any better. I have no control over that. So no. Different business unit.
It is a conversation for a different time, because like we share a lot of our data journey is closer than proper Charlie, because he's the academic and we're the had to figure it out. Although you know a lot more programming stuff than I do, but.
it all requires a little bit of programming. And even what I do today on the bourbon side, I still do plenty of programming. So as you said, Charlie, proper Charlie, I guess we'll say, the
better Charlie, the better looking Charlie. Yes, keep going. Let's keep going with those. I like them.
So the podcast actually got started because of my business partner, Ryan. He's the one that had the idea with it. He actually owns a few different businesses, but his main one is Go Green Lawn Services here in Kentucky. He doesn't cut or mow grass. People think that's what he does. All he does, but he has a turf management degree. So he's the one that goes around, sprays all your yards, making sure they're nice and pretty and clover free. Now he's grown the business around 2,000 clients in Louisville. He doesn't really do it anymore. He's got a whole team that takes care of it. But when he was starting out, his days were spent in the truck, and he would listen to podcasts all the time, going between jobs in the truck, doing bids, spraying stuff. And he'd listen to things like Seth Godin, Joe Rogan, Tim Ferriss. I mean, a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah.
And during the winter months and the hot summer months, he's not busy because you don't really have anything to do during that time. So he thought, well, how cool would it be if I just started a podcast and see what happens? He was going to do it on his industry, but didn't think there was going to be enough runway. But his brother-in-law is from Bardstown. They're all from Bardstown, Kentucky, which is the bourbon capital of the world. And they go, listen, you know all the people in bourbon. Why don't you do a bourbon podcast? And he goes, that's actually a really good idea. But he reached out to me. We weren't really great friends at the time, but we knew each other. He knew I was getting to bourbon. We had talked at some of his derby parties and stuff like that previously. And he knew that I was into tech, had a little bit of a public speaking background, and said, it would be great if you go and do this with me. And I go, well, let's see what else is out there. And this kind of gets into my, maybe a little bit of data, but maybe just more investigative journalist kind of thing. Because anytime you want to do something, you got to just go and research and figure out what's your competition like. And at the time, there really wasn't much. There was some shows of guys sitting around a microphone sniffing Elmer T. Lee going, oh, it smells like caramel and vanilla. And I'm going like, who the hell wants to listen to this? And
that's the same situation we were in with the data stuff.
Yeah. And so it's like, we got to find something that's interesting. Like, what's that different angle? And speaking of just tech in general, we kind of got our inspiration and our start because of the guys that started the Cloudcast, the guys that they bring on startup CEOs and everything like that to have them tell their story, and people that connect with their types of products and just be able to kind of talk about it. And I said, that's what's missing. How do we get people inside the bourbon industry? Because there's all kinds of characters, and we expose those to the people that drink it. And therefore people can create a bigger and more deeper connection with the brand that they they love. And you get to hear stories that they wouldn't hear anywhere else unless you had to be there in person. So we were really that first megaphone that we put as a big spotlight on the industry, that we were able to share these stories broadly with a ton of people. And that ended up being a great recipe for success, because now we started that again back in 2015, and there's been lots of pivots and turns along the way. But now we've grown to the point where there's around 40,000 unique listeners per month. That's around 180,000 downloads. Last year in 2022, we did 2.1 million downloads. And it's great. I mean, we're no Joe Rogan, but for a bourbon podcast, I feel like we're doing pretty good. So it's one of those things that, and even when I talk about those pivots, that's all data. I mean, the data actually plays a big role in what we do in the podcast, because it actually goes to determine what types of shows we do, because we can do multiple different types of shows and we can see exactly, well, how many downloads does it get? If we knew pretty early on that people really don't care about craft whiskey, because if you can't get a particular person's craft whiskey, it's a small farm in Pennsylvania and they're only distributed in that state. Well, my listeners in California and Texas and Colorado and Florida and Kentucky and Tennessee, they don't care.
That is
they're
fair.
not going to listen to it. Yeah. And so that's when we made the decision that we've got to go broader, and we've got to focus on the brands that people know and care about, that are on the shelves that people can relate to. And there's a lot of those have to be big national brands. And that has really been one pivotal thing that we look at is just, where does the data tell us? How does it trend? What are popular types of shows? Like, what are going to get the views? And that's at the surface level, to be able to try to find how data is going to impact a lot of things that we do for the show.
Yeah. So you're really, when you started embracing data, you could say really the genesis then was your podcast, as opposed to starting a brand. Like,
Was it?
Like Pursuit Spirits.
Yeah, the brand didn't exist without the podcast, and we feel like it's probably going to go hand in hand like that for the next, hopefully forever.
So you started the podcast first and then started doing the bourbon?
Isn't that amazing? That we were able to build a podcast, build a national thing that's recognized by a lot of just uber geeks in the bourbon and the whiskey world.
Yeah.
And the cool thing about this is that we've been told by a few different people already. They go, gosh, you all have an amazing opportunity, because a lot of people build a brand and then try to find an audience.
Yeah.
You all had an audience
I'm
and
with
built a
you.
brand.
Yeah.
And so for us, we're very fortunate that we have, our 1,000 true fans. We have a lot of people out there that have our back on day one, and they'll go to bat for us. They'll be ambassadors. They'll share it. They'll help be our word of mouth, because as anybody knows in the whiskey world, nothing gets popular just because either the bottle looks fancy or anything like that. It's mostly because, like, oh, have you had this? Have you tried this? You should try that. You need to go get yourself a bottle of this. And that's typically how things work.
Oh,
so
yeah.
you see this grain right here?
Yeah.
I was when I literally went in to pick this out, I was just like, man, how do you even come up with like a label like that sticks out? And so when I got I didn't ask anybody anything. I just I'm going to find it. Because I looked on your website and I was just like, I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna find it amongst all the whiskeys or all the bourbons. Although this is the rye, because that's all they had. They were sold out of the other.
That's okay. Our rye's our other little baby. We love it too. So
I love, my favorite rye is Elijah Craig, and I do think this is better. And that's not just kissing up.
Oh wait, did you ever do I haven't tried the rye yet.
I saw him drinking from a glass. And it looked like bourbon, so I just went ahead and did it.
I got 2 sniffers behind me, and I I don't normally have, bourbon bottles on my kitchen counter, but I was trying to be festive today, and I'm going to grab mine. And Kenny, I think it would be interesting to not only talk about when you started Pursuit Spirits, but also, tell us, because I think the idea you're blending today, and because on day one, you don't have 10-year-old barrels, right? And so talk a little bit about what that means.
Yeah.
The process.
I can talk about the process and kind of the origin of it as well. It's not so much data-centric focus, but the idea and the way this came out is because on the show, we had talked about a bourbon brand that was starting out of a liquor store in Memphis, Tennessee. And we had just talked about it. And we're like, oh, cool. They have their own private label, but this is nothing that's breaking, groundbreaking or shaking or anything like that, because back in the day before Prohibition, grocery stores, pharmacies, doctors' offices, they all had their own private label whiskey that they would either sell or prescribe or something like that too.
Yeah.
Didn't really think anything of it. Then a few weeks later, I get this phone call, and this guy goes, "Hey, I helped build that brand. Would you be interested in starting your own?" Obvious answer. Well, tell me more. So to kind of fast forward a few steps there, he was a barrel broker, allowed us to come and hand select barrels of whiskey that we would put in our own label, and we would sell to our audience. And that was something that we had just started because we felt really comfortable in selecting great barrels of whiskey, bottling it, uncut, cask strength, barrel to bottle, as that kind of moniker goes. But that's not a very scalable business model. It's very hard to do that. And we had to figure out how do we grow this? How do we create something that's more sustainable? Because it was kind of cool for some side money. We did like 30, 40 single barrels over the span of 2.5+ years.
Gotcha.
But it's not enough that it's a lot of pain in the butt to do all that. So it's like, how do we scale a little bit less of the pain in the butt, but scale up the product? And really the only way you get there is by creating a small batch, by dumping 10, 20, 50, 100 barrels, whatever it is at the time, whatever how big your batch is going to be, and creating a product through there. Well, we're podcasters. We don't have $30 million to go start a distillery. So we're not going to go create something. And by and large, when anybody that gets started, they source on the open market. We started doing that, and we were able to kind of pivot a little bit. But our idea, what we did is we focused on this concept of united, because nobody else in the industry, other than probably barrel craft spirits, is really looking at blending. And we see that as the next wave of American whiskey, because that's the way that you can create and discover new and interesting flavors that you don't just get from one mash bill aged in 30 different warehouses all blended together to try to be a consistent product. So how do we create something that's new and unique that's only going to be bespoke to us? And so what we did is we said, well, let's find some barrels and partner directly with the distilleries that we actually love and they make really good stuff. So on our bourbon, and that's really how it all first started, is we partnered with
that one.
Yeah. So we partnered with a Tennessee distillery, Bardstown Bourbon Company in Kentucky, as well as Finger Lakes Distilling in New York. So we created a Kentucky, Tennessee, New York blend. And a lot of people are always like, oh, New York bourbon, like blah, blah, blah. But they make an amazing wheated bourbon. And a lot of people put these blinders on because a lot of people still assume that bourbon can only be made in Kentucky, but that's not the way
Tennessee.
Yeah. And it's not the way the laws
All right,
are
so
written.
in Tennessee, it says not in Tullahoma.
Exactly.
So I lived until this week 10 minutes from Tullahoma. I know it's in Tullahoma, so it's not in Tullahoma, or is that tongue in cheek that it's not in Tullahoma?
Well, no, I mean it's definitely not from there, because everybody assumes that when you say Tennessee bourbon, they assume it's going to be from George Dickel. But with our agreements in place that we can't say for the NDA of actually who we're getting it from, but it's about 30 minutes south of Nashville in Columbia, Tennessee. That's about as much as I can tell you. So
let's clarify something though. Jack Daniels, bourbon or no?
See, I love this question because I am on the fence that Jack Daniels is a bourbon. It does absolutely everything. It does everything legally of what it can be done to be considered a bourbon. However, they want to designate themselves as being a Tennessee whiskey. And we also
like a sour mash, right?
Well, no, sour mash is actually just it's a process where you have the back set into the mash to kind of help balance out pH levels and kind of get the fermentation process started. That was actually spearheaded by I can't remember the name, but it started with Old Crow back in the day.
Okay.
So I even had the master distiller of Jack Daniels on the show, and we asked him that question.
Oh wow!
And that's how he
answered
it.
What episode is that?
I have to go back and look at it, but
all right.
I'll write it down.
Yeah,
we can't assume everybody is a bourbon connoisseur. So what does bourbon mean? So there is a definition of what bourbon means.
There's
or what makes a bourbon?
There's about 8 things, because really it's the way the saying goes is that every bourbon is a whiskey, but not every whiskey is a bourbon. And that's because bourbon has a few things, and this is actually all written into law. It was put into government books. So to be a bourbon, it is a distinct product of the United States. It cannot be created anywhere else in the world and be called bourbon. And a bourbon has to be done with at least a 51% base corn mash bill. It's typically around 70 to 80% is usually where it's at, because the corn really gives it that sweetness and that flavor. Unlike Scotch, which uses a lot of barley, and so it has this kind of like denser earthiness kind of intense to it. So you have that. It has to go into a new charred oak container, which is typically a barrel. So bourbon barrels can only be used once. Most of the time, once those bourbon barrels get used, they get put on a container ship and they go over to Scotland, or they go to Mexico, or they go somewhere else. They go to Jamaica.
And it's specifically white oak, right?
It just has to be oak. Now, white oak is typically used only because it is a denser type of oak, and it's not as porous. Whereas other oaks can be porous. So you see French oak, I've seen chinkapin oak, there's Brazilian oak, there's all kinds of things that are out there as well.
And that has to do with evaporation, right?
So inside of the barrel, you do have evaporation that does happen. Yeah. There could be something where different types of oak can influence the evaporation rates that go into it as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So which makes sense why, if something is a 15-year aged bourbon, there's a lot of evaporation. That could be half of the barrel at that point. Which obviously adds to the price. And then, of course, you think about the rent of that barrel space for that. So I've been waiting too long, and I wanted to at least do this while on here. This is the bourbon that you have that's blended from Tennessee, Kentucky, and New York. I am not going to sit here and tell you I smell smell 18 different things.
Yeah, do that
I will say
thing
I feel a sweetness to it that makes it where doing it without, and I'm saying this because I've obviously been drinking it regularly since starting to listen to the podcast about 6 to 8 months ago. But so I'll give it a try. But what do people say your bourbon has? What are the notes or flavors?
One thing that we really like to blend for, and we try to blend with a purpose every single time, and we really look for that orange peel note. So if you taste it, you probably get a little bit of that orange peel.
I get
coming
that.
in.
Okay.
That's citrus.
When you say it, it's amazing how you all go, oh yeah, I do get that.
Yeah, I mean that's one thing that has always stuck out with ours. And I mean, of course, you get some other things. You get some little bit of cocoa, a little bit of like that, a little bit of chocolate, some little bit of anise, but really that overwhelming orange peel is kind of what we really like, because I haven't met a lot of people that don't like the flavor of orange. And so when we were able to kind of come up with this, that's really was highlighted. And I said, this is what we need to stick with and build on top of that.
So you chose your blend based off of specific information or the feels?
So it was a few different things. Data always plays a big role in this as well, because when you have to figure out exactly, and this is all in a Google sheet that Ryan says that it belongs in like the glass case at MIT because of how much
intellectual property.
Elaborate.
Yeah, like how he always says that he's scared he's going to fat thumb something and we're going to go bankrupt because he can click on a cell and it's like 42,000 characters long. But really, when we started this and you try to figure out exactly what kind of barrels can you use, well, there's a lot of data that actually goes into it, and it's a lot of estimates, because you say I got a 4-year-old barrel, I got a 6-year-old barrel, I got a 14-year-old barrel. What's the yield I'm going to get out of there? What's the average proof that I'm going to get out of this? Because let's say it went in at the barrel at 105. Well, it's going to come out of the barrel maybe around 100 to 108. If it goes in at 120, well, I could have anywhere between 118 to potentially 130. So when you have that and you go to dump it, you're going to have different levels of, well, actually how much liquid's coming out, but also the proof. And when you need to proof it down to your final proof point, which ours, we settled on 108, and 108 for our proof point is because we're speaking to a hardcore whiskey geek and a hardcore whiskey audience. So we didn't want to come out with some 93 proofer, but when you start adding water into it, so when you start adding water to it, you have to figure out how much more yield are you going to get out of it. So there's a lot of formula and number crunching that kind of went in to figure out how do we conservatively guesstimate how many bottles could we get out of a particular dump with different types of barrels and the ones that we're going to be able to use. And that really all goes into a final, what we call essentially a building block. So when we pull in those 3 different elements, those 3 different states that we kind of talked about, that we built that united concept around, well, it's not 33, 33, 33 of each of them, right? I mean, we want to make sure that our blend is unique to us. So there's different amounts of each that go into it. And so we had to figure out exactly, all right, if we like how this tastes, and we're doing small scale blends, we go, this tastes really good at 100 mLs. What do we need to do to scale this out to say 750 mLs? So we had a full bottle. All right, now that we have 750 mLs and it tastes really good, how do we scale this out to full barrels? So you take it from, a portion of a 750 ml, and you got to extrapolate that out to 53 gallons, but 53 gallons times X many barrels. Yes.
Somebody that doesn't like math. Yeah. I'm starting to hear a little bit of embracing it these days.
But bourbon's fun, right? I didn't want to do that.
No, that's fair.
If you put it, then math is fun. I love it. So we got to start doing that in high schools.
Put it towards an application that I'm going to pay attention to. I think that's the moral of the story there.
Absolutely. Yeah. No.
If math helps you do something that you like, math is okay.
Yes. That was one of the things. So at that point, we figured out our building block, and so now we know exactly, all right, we need X barrels of this, and this, and that's our building block. And we get 2,000 bottles out of that. You double it, 4,000, so on and so forth. And so that's the way that we are able to start having a better estimate of, okay, this is what we're going to dump. This is the yield we're going to get. If we add more of this, what are we going to get? So on and so forth. So there's a lot of number crunching that goes in with that as well.
How many bottles have you made?
Oh gosh. Probably close to 40,000 maybe by now. Wow. So we've like last year, in 2022, we sold around 4,500 6-packs of just United. And So that's way that and
That's this stuff, right?
Correct. So between our United Bourbon, United Rye, we did around 4,500 six packs.
So I see data in the recipe formulation part, and I want to get to the business side of it because obviously data is a key component to there. But I do think we want to, because I haven't tasted the rye yet. What is the difference between a bourbon and a rye whiskey?
Oh yeah,
pretty simple. So when I had mentioned that 51% corn, flip it around. So as long as it's 51% rye, it becomes a rye whiskey. And there's some other rules that go into play, but for the most part, that's usually the primary rule that's enforced when it has to become a rye whiskey. Most people are under the assumption that because there's this factory in Indiana called Midwest Grain Products, and they make probably 80 to 90% of the rye whiskey you see on the shelves today. And they make their standard what's called 95.5, 95% rye, 5% malted barley. And that malted barley there is just to help crack down the enzymes and help the fermentation process and everything like that. So it's usually this big, bold, very punchy, spicy, and I think spice bomb when you'd be able to try it. With ours, we didn't want to go that route. In fact, we said from the very beginning, we don't want to be a company that is built off of MGP because there's so many people that have done it before. It's great whiskey, but we're bored of it. There's got to be something new that's out there. And so with this one on our rye whiskey, we partnered with Bardstown Bourbon Company as well as Sagamore Spirit based out of Baltimore, Maryland. So we actually have a true Kentucky, Maryland rye whiskey blend, which nobody else has. And we have we actually have 3 different distillates that go into there. There's 2 other 95.5s that come from both Bardstown and Sagamore, but we go really heavy with Sagamore's 52% rye, 43% corn. And with that sort of like that barely rye mash bill, you can tell it's a lot sweeter than your typical rye whiskey.
Yeah.
And so
I just tried it for the first time and I've done rye. Usually I'll use rye for an old fashioned because it has that pepperiness and, you add the sweet and the bitters that kind of rounds it out. Not one to sip it, but I could sip this one. And I don't want to give you the commercial, but I'm going to do it anyways because it's good, right?
Is rye whiskey a bourbon?
No, so rye whiskey is not a bourbon. It does not fall into those definitions that would make it. And that's because of the 51% corn aspect. So if it's 51% rye,
means that.
Yes. So if it's 51% rye, there's absolutely no way you can get. If you even have 49% corn, it still technically can't be a bourbon.
All right. So before we get into the idea of what does it take to build a business, and I want to get there, but I'm gonna hit you all with a couple of quizzes here. So is that okay? Because I just got to play. You know me, Charlie.
That's fine. So, we got to do which one to do.
So I'm going to start. So I've got some data in front of me, and so being the academic, I have access to some good data, of course. And so
pause real quick. So just so you know, Proper Charlie knows how to get anything.
He's got a guy that knows a guy.
I'm a guy.
No, he is the guy.
I'm the data guy.
So from is data available? He's the guy that knows if it is or not. So now, from that perspective,
okay, so I don't think I'm going to be surprised if you know the top state for consumption of straight whiskey, and that's the definition here.
Wait, pause. Straight whiskey is single barrel, or is it blend? Like, what's the definition of straight whiskey? Because that's important to get this question right.
So to be a straight, that means it has to be at least 2 years old and it can't be adulterated with anything else. That's all that means.
Yeah. Okay. So I think the rye whiskeys count in that, the bourbons and other whiskeys that meet that criteria. So number one, what do y'all think? What's the number one state for consumption? I'm talking about per capita, so per 1,000 people. So we're thinking about who are the biggest drunkards? Who drinks per individual or per 1,000 the most whiskey, straight whiskey?
Okay.
So beer is Wisconsin, 100%.
Yeah.
Brandy's Wisconsin.
But I don't know. I don't. Who drinks the bourbon? Who drinks the liquor?
Kenny, where are you?
I guess I'd say Kentucky.
Kentucky is by far the largest, and we are looking at 293 9-liter cases per 1,000 people. The next highest is 243, so 293 compared to second place of 243, and then everybody's below 200 after that. Number 2, I'm not even going to ask you all because there's no way you're getting this.
No, I'll get it. I'll get it. I'll get it. It's Wyoming.
You're the other Charlie for a reason.
It's Wyoming.
Wyoming's third. Good for you. Ooh. That's pretty good.
Ooh, I'll take that.
They're at 184. Third is New Hampshire. So it looks like the smaller ones seem to be coming up to the top with District of Columbia, if we decide to count them, Missouri, then Alaska. Tennessee is down about at 9th, and then you got Colorado. Last place, by the way, is
who's the least drunkard state?
New Jersey.
New Jersey is the least drunkard state?
No, for straight whiskey. They must drink other stuff.
Oh, okay.
So Jersey, Rhode Island, New York, and Connecticut are the bottom 4. So, and by the way, Kenny, this is your data after today. I'll make sure I send it over to you.
Yeah.
Because it's always fun to look at. All right, the number 1. So this is literally revenue of whiskey in a market for a country. 2022. So this is hot off the presses. We have the data from 2022, and I'm looking at the top. Looks like I'm looking at about the top 14 countries, and all I can say is the top one does not start with a U.
It's
so
India.
let me look.
Kenny, what'd you say?
India.
It is.
Yeah.
Isn't that something?
Oh,
I was going to say China specifically.
India has so many people, and they drink a ton of scotch, tons of scotch.
And that counts as straight whiskey. Yeah. So
that's not fair.
Well,
Scotch is scotch.
The man knows the whiskey market. He's allowed to
That's fair.
There.
That's fine.
So they're at over 17,000, 17,660, and that's millions of dollars. So we're talking about 17, basically, $1 billion, right? Because 17,000 in millions would be that. I think I'm doing my math correctly. U.S. is not far behind at 17.07. The next highest after U.S. is Thailand at 6. So they're a third of where we go, and then it goes Japan, which they don't really do. They I know they do a bunch of weird stuff with their whiskeys. Then France, Brazil, Canada, United Kingdom, Spain, Australia. I keep going because I want to get to China for Charlie's answer.
Yeah, because I guess
Germany,
China,
Russia, and then China. China's pretty low on that list.
So I was definitely wrong.
Well, that's okay. Well, I want to get into, because I want to make sure that we stay on good time, because we're going to respect our guests' time today. We want to get into, what you started a business. So let's not forget about, yes, it's bourbon. Yes, it's fun to talk about, but you decided to get into the business. And before I get into that, Charlie, did you have something else?
Well, he started a business on top of having a job. So now, like we were talking about this beforehand, Kenny, but you've got 2 jobs.
And add third, you say podcaster.
And then a podcast, but then you've got 2 podcasts. So you got 2 jobs and 2 podcasts. What the actual hell is going on with this? Because that's a lot.
It is a lot. And like I said at the very beginning, I hate free time. So I'm constantly doing something. Much to my wife's chagrin, she doesn't like it, but it's just one of those things that and when I do something, I usually go all in with it. And the podcast definitely started first, but we see where the bourbon business can go. We've crunched the numbers. We've seen the data. We see exactly how many more cases do we have to sell until we can actually start paying ourselves. And at that point, I can drop one of these jobs, right? But we still got a little bit.
So tell us about the balance then, because we're talking about data, and I'm super into bourbon, so I'm all about talking about bourbon. But as far as the data in bourbon goes, what's the data telling you right now?
So what we do, especially for our particular brand, we always have to figure out where we're going to go next. When we started the podcast, when we say we started the brand, we had a national audience with the podcast. But to take a product national is very, very difficult. That's probably the dumbest thing you can do is try to be on store shelves nationwide. And we decided that, well, we're going to be an online only brand. We're going to show these retailers what it's all about. We're going to do this and direct to consumer shipping, but it's not as easy as it sounds. It's a big hurdle to get people to go to a website to buy liquor, and people still have that connection. They want to go to the store. They want to physically see it. They want to hold it. They want to talk about it and sell sweet nothings to it or whatever it is. But
seems like the pandemic would have changed some of that, though.
It would have, and there's always been good progressions that we've seen of where direct to consumer shipping is going, but it's still years away from being anything like what Amazon is today. Plus, a lot of people, they want to try something before they buy it. So you can't really get rid of that in-store experience. So we kind of discounted that at the very beginning, but now we're going back and changing that. And for us, we had to figure out exactly what markets we open up. And when we do that, it's as simple as looking at podcast data. We look at exactly where are people listening, because those
you're so lucky to have that data.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what we do is, and not only that is, you can only get so much data from your back-end provider for your podcast hosting platform. But what we do is every year and a half or two, we'll do a listener survey, and that way we get demographics. We see exactly what do our listeners look like? What do they? How much money do they earn? What's their household income? How many bottles of bourbon do they buy based on what we say in the podcast? We want to make sure we take that information and we provide it to our advertisers. But at the same exact time, we figure out where they live. We figure out what are the major metro areas that we could be a part of. And that goes into trying to figure out, okay, if we do that, where's our support mechanism? Because of just two guys and trying to get bottles on the shelves, it's really hard to break through the noise of everybody chasing Blantons or something like that. So we've got to figure out where's our support going to be in our support system. And that's going to be our basically the listeners that are concentrated in those particular areas. Like, how can they be the ones that talk about it?
Where's your largest listener group?
So Kentucky actually is the largest. It seems weird, but it really is. So Kentucky, Ohio, Texas, Tennessee's pretty good. Missouri jumped up a big bunch of numbers as well. So we've seen those as 5 really critical states that we currently distribute in, and we're going to be growing more as the years go, as our whiskey becomes more of age. We're spending $1.3 to $1.4 million right now every year on new fill whiskey barrels with money we don't have. So
are you nursing? Are you nursing barrels at this point? Or
so
you made some. You made 40,000 bottles.
Yeah. So what we did is, you buy, when we figured out our particular formulas that we liked for our whiskey, our bourbon and our rye whiskey, we went back to our sources and we said, hey, we want to buy 4, 3, 2, 1 and new make, because really you scratch by on margin when you have to buy aged product because you're paying a good chunk of money for it. But your margin is all going to be when that new make comes of age, because a new make barrel can be anywhere between $750 to $1,150 per barrel versus an aged product, which can be anywhere between $3,000 to $5,000 a barrel. So when you go to actually go and bottle it, well, yes, you have to wait for the time, but you're going to make a lot more margin. So right now we're running sort of razor thin on margin in the hopes that in 4+ years that we will be able to turn that around and again, start paying ourselves and we'll have a more of a healthy bottom line at the end of the day too.
Gotcha.
So at this point, you're looking at the 3 barrels that go into this and saying, okay, each bottle should cost that.
Yeah, I mean, we know what our raw goods costs are and everything like that. So the whole thing is when you have new make and you can do it at scale, your raw goods costs will decrease, and that is something that we're counting on for the future. And we're only going to be, we're still going to, even at our, like I said, we're spending $1.3 to $1.4 million right now in new make. And so we have around like 3,500 barrels in our possession, but most of them are less, like a year and a half less than that.
Yeah. And we're I want to make sure that we respect, Kenny, your time. We're trying to keep you at an hour because you're recording a Bourbon Pursuit podcast tonight as well. So you are being very generous with your time.
Quite all right.
And so let's go back to the data, and we'll go a little bit of rapid fire, Charlie, and help me out here. But in looking at the different aspects, you've got recipe, you've got marketing, you've got even just resources of your time, and of course, even just getting on shelves. Which part do you feel is the most fun using data to determine, and which one is the one where, it's a grind, and yeah, you got to use the data and you got to do what you got to do, but it's a grind to get there.
Yeah, I'll tell you the worst part. So the worst part is actually dealing with distributors, because
you're going to say that
it's terrible. Because you want them to be your best friends. They promise you the world, and they buy a bunch of cases from you, but they don't actually do anything to get on the store shelves. They just sit on their butt and wait for you to yell at them or spend more money with them. But the good thing that makes it all kind of worthwhile is actually at the data. So you get access to a portal where you can see exactly how many cases are on hand, what's in inventory, what's been sold, and what are the accounts they've been sold to. And you can utilize that to see exactly what pull-through data looks like, what bottles are selling, and then what new accounts are they going to. Plus, they also offer you, they say, hey, here's our top 50 or our top 100 whiskey accounts in certain cities or regions or the state or whatever it is. And from there, you start plugging in a bunch of spreadsheets and doing a bunch of VLOOKUPs, and you go, oh, they're sitting there complaining, saying that we can't get your bottles in stores or blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, we've only eclipsed 20% of the top 50 whiskey accounts in the city. Like, go to the other 40. And so it's one of those things that, it's a back and forth where you got to have some sort of concession on something, and you got to try to meet in the middle, because no matter how hard you push, they're going to push back, saying that it's something that we have to do. So it's just something that's a necessary evil, but thankfully there is a little bit of data that can help you get there. On the other side of it. Go ahead, Charlie.
But before you get to the other side, and I'll be responsible.
He's so excited about this topic, isn't he?
So you're competing in a very competitive environment. And I super like the fact that your podcast came before the bourbon, and you made the best decisions to go towards that. But like, how do you deal with these distributors? Do you come down on them, or do you play the game because you're at a certain level?
Ryan and I, who's my business partner, we usually have to play a good cop, bad cop. And I got to play bad cop today. It was actually kind of fun. We actually had a conversation with the distributor today, and because
were you not having it?
Well, I mean, we look at the data, and I look at it, and there were, from what I was like, there's been 4 months when they haven't moved a single bottle out in the market, and they keep punting and not wanting to talk to us, but they finally got us. We finally got them in corner, got to talk. And I go, listen, what's going on? There's 4 months, no sales. What's happening? And they'll say, well, we had some sales in October. We did this. I go, fine. The last 3 months, like, give me an answer. And it just silenced the room. And so those are just the things that, it's not in my DNA to do something like that, but it's something that it's your baby. It's like, you just can't let people trample over you. And that's one of the things, like, it's not a comfortable feeling for me to do. I'm not a salesperson. I would much rather sit in the back.
But you do know data, though.
Yeah, I'd much rather sit in the back, let my JavaScript automations go and build everything for me and all this other kind of stuff, instead of actually having to be on the phone doing these one-on-one conversations with folks.
So Kenny, tell us what is fun about using data in the bourbon industry.
Yeah. So the fun part about this is really where we get to talk to people like Susan Wall of Heaven Hill. We get to talk to a lot. We get to talk to a lot of good people in the industry, because you see how the growth, the explosion, the boom, and how it's going. And we don't have the market data and research and analysts to actually go and figure out exactly, well, how are they predicting it? Because
that's money.
They're putting down hundreds of millions, if not $1 billion in expansions, new stills, more warehouses, more barrels. I mean, you name it. They're throwing
I heard you guys talking about, in the last episode, I heard you talking about the 53-foot distillery or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there's Heaven Hill. Yeah.
It's money.
Yeah.
To tell you, Kenny, if you go back to 1980, and this is in thousands, so it would be 26 million. So 26 million 9-liter cases were consumed in straight whiskey in the United States. It went as low as 14 $15 million in 2009, and this past year it eclipsed what we were drinking in 1980, and we're at 28 million. And in the next 3 years, it's supposedly going to increase up to 31 to 32. So the projection is for straight whiskey,
okay.
And consumption in millions of 9-liter cases. So the market is considering to go up at a 5% clips. Of course, it's projections, and you know how projections work, but it's amazing to see this U shape in the distribution, and how it hit a bottom, and just when you 6 years before you started your podcast. And so if we go back to when you started your podcast, 2015, it was at about 18 to 19 million, and now it's up to 28. So that's a pretty big, that's a 50% growth since you started. It's all because of the Bourbon Pursuit podcast.
I'd like to think that. I'll take a little bit of credit for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fair enough.
We're at the hour, and we want to respect your time, so you can get ready. So tell us what you think is on the horizon for bourbon, and then maybe something a little bit, or even if you want to, riff off into the tech and data space. But we want to, of course, give you the final word.
On the bourbon side, as we were kind of hinting towards at the end there's just a lot of growth. There's an explosion of it, and we're fortunate that we can kind of ride the coattails of bigger players in this game and see exactly. It's not really data. It's more like just watching and following and seeing exactly what they're doing. That gives us the confidence
that is data.
Okay.
And that's one of the things that we're into, is just like observational data is data.
So where's things going in the future, Kenny?
But yeah, I mean, like I said, the explosion, the growth that's there, that makes us feel really confident in our brand and what we're building and how much money that we're spending, and how we're $2 million in debt right now with about $6 million more to go until we can see the other side. But as long as people keep drinking whiskey, we've got a lot of cool things in the pipeline. We've got our own brick and mortar that we're going to be building and building that one out, as well as.
And you glossed over that, but you have gotten funding recently within the last few months, and that's that $6 million that you just mentioned.
Correct. Yeah. So we were able
to. Fantastic.
Yeah. So it's
where's the locals? Where's the brick and mortar?
So we haven't announced it just yet, but it will be coming. And hopefully the next few months we'll be able to announce where it's.
He's not going to announce it on ours. He's got to do it on Bourbon Pursuit or behind.
Fair enough. When you do, we'll be there.
Fair.
Yeah. So TBD, stay tuned for that one. For us, the data shows that having your own brick and mortar actually creates more brand connectivity, more brand awareness, and makes more people a fan of it. And even more, the data, it actually shows that you make a lot more money in margin because you sell the bottles yourself instead of having to go through another retailer. So that's where we see a lot of the promise going forward. On the tech side, right now, I'm pretty sure you all see everything that's happening in AI world. And I think AI is going to change a bunch of stuff. And whether it's not just for people that have to turn in homework because they don't know what the hell they're talking about, but it's literally going to be for every aspect. I think that we're going to start seeing a lot of things even in the bourbon world. I think AI is going to change a lot of things. I'm glad to see that the NFT thing is kind of falling off a little bit, but I do like to see that AI is going to be the next big promising thing for a lot of folks. And hopefully you are in a position that you're the one writing the AI, and it's not your job that is going to be the one that's being eliminated by AI.
Well, speaking of AI, our next episode is going to be on AI and ChatGPT, and I'm going to start flexing my muscles on my AI knowledge, and we're really going to talk about that and what that really means for the society. And so you're right, Kenny. It's a game changer at this point, and we can't predict what that is going to do, but we can embrace it, ride the wave, and hope to use it. And people like you, it's why having data people in the bourbon industry will give you that competitive advantage. It's just going to, I think.
That's true.
Yeah.
That is absolutely true.
We'll find out. Only time will tell.
Yeah, for sure. And so,
I believe.
I believe too. And Kenny, I just can't thank you for your time today. Let's be honest, people in the data and tech world, if you ask them if you are a bourbon guy or a bourbon gal, they usually say yes. And so this is a space where, we have a lot of passionate people that like this. And what's so much fun about what you're doing is you're doing it the right way. You're not, you know, and so you're using data to do it in the right way, as opposed to what we see a lot of, which is riding the marketing waves and doing the gimmicky stuff. You know, at the end of the day, to be honest, you know, you've priced your stuff right. And I think that would have been a great conversation too. I mean, you probably had to use data to figure out that price. You know, you wanted to make money or at least break even, but at the same time, not. Yeah, but you also want to be not looked at as the Wild Turkey 101, right? You know, and which is nothing wrong with, because I'm a big fan of Wild Turkey 101, but this is a little bit different, and it's meant to be a little bit different. So, Charlie, any last parting shots before we give it to Kenny to end it for us?
Yeah. So, like, just to kind of bounce off of what you were saying, like, you're doing the blending now, and the blending is good. You're picking the right stuff for the blends. When do you buy that big old container,
like the
for your sour mash?
Keep listening to Bourbon Pursuit, and you'll find out, right?
We'll see. We don't really want to be distillers.
They haven't said anything.
Yeah, I was like, we really want to be distillers.
Okay.
So we'll be continuing to contract all that out for as much as we can, because all that comes at economies of scale, which we never want to grow or build. And it's a lot easier to just be a cook in somebody else's kitchen.
So, Kenny, thank you for taking the time. This has been a pleasure. You can obviously tell these are two guys that decided to geek out with you, but you know, at the end of the day, we believe that exposing people to other industries and a little bit of how data embraces those industries is really important. And then that was the point of today. And we happened to get a guy that happens to be in the tech industry. And that was really refreshing. And so, any parting shots, Kenny, before we head out?
Yeah, just make sure you follow Bourbon Pursuit. Where'd you get your podcasts? Bourbon Pursuit, just type in the word bourbon. Hopefully we're the first result for you there.
You are.
Yep.
You definitely are.
There you go.
Follow us.
I typed in bourbon and you came up.
I like Bourbon Pursuit. I love the behind the pursuit. I love hearing about, you know, the industry itself. Pursuit Spirits is where you can find their bourbons and learn more. Like for me, I wanted to learn the percentages of corn versus wheat versus the other ingredients, and that's where you want to go to learn more about that. We could have obviously spent another hour here talking about the marketing and stuff like that, but we're not going to do that. We want to
come back for a round two at some point.
Oh, I love it. And if you ever need an old data guy to be on a bourbon podcast, let me know. I might know a guy.
So Proper Charlie will sort you out if you want to know anything about data in bourbon that's available to the public.
I got the snack for doing the data thing. I like it, and I appreciate that, Charlie. So, Charlie, any parting shots? This is where I ask it, but I don't expect an answer back.
Well, so I have none because it's time to go.
It is.
Like, we want to be respectful. So
absolutely. So, again, thank you, Kenny, for your time. For all of us here listening to this, my name's Charlie Apigian.
And I'm Charlie Yieldman.
And until next